Hello and welcome back. And normally at the beginning of a video, I like to insert a funny little joke, something whimsical. Unfortunately, I just don't have it in me for this one. Synology's new range of surveillance cameras now require a Synology surveillance camera license. And if you've followed this brand for a while, you'll know why that is bonkers, frankly. Quick recap. Synology currently, or I say currently, up until recently, were the only brand out there that I knew that had both their own range of surveillance ready NAS solutions and their own range of branded cameras. That's changed slightly, and brands like Ubiquiti with their Unify range and Protect and their own cameras have muddied the water a bit there, but pretty much that still remained true in the world of traditional turnkey NAS until Unify came along. And with that, Synology's range of cameras, which were becoming ever more diversified, although arguably they didn't have the hardware range that a lot of other surveillance providers have in terms of their camera set, it did allow you to have a Synology surveillance system, be it a standard DSM or a dedicated surveillance system, and then you had a bunch of camera licenses that you could use with Synology cameras or OnViv third-party cameras, and then as you added more cameras, you could choose between using a third-party OnViv camera and then paying a license for each of those cameras or a camera pack, alternatively buy a Synology camera which had been designed for surveillance station, they say, with the firmware and optimization, but also was a great deal easier to integrate into that system, and finally didn't require a license, whether it was you thought of it as includes a license or it doesn't need a license at all. It's all much of a muchness. This change, alongside the launch of these new cameras, changes things dramatically. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, because what is the appeal of buying a Synology camera now if you can get the same hardware and pay a license versus buying a Synology camera and paying a license? At that point, the only real advantage you're getting is that it gets added to surveillance station a little bit quicker, and of course the pass-through for surveillance station to be able, presumably, to be able to control a lot of the hardware and features and facilities. But again, you can do that already with other OnViv cameras. Not all OnViv cameras, and obviously the range of features and facilities that an individual camera has, such as AI edge applications and just how much can be controlled and passed through, will vary from camera to camera, but that's what the compatibility list is for. Now, circling in on those three new cameras, the BC800Z and the turret and bullet style 510 series camera, if you go into the license pages from Synology, you can see that they are listed now as requiring a license, and the CC400W, that tiny little webcam style one, doesn't require a license. Now, the other problem we've got is once you go to Synology's website, you can see I've been doing here, getting a full listing of the old cameras isn't really theirs. As is the case whenever we see Synology refresh their NAS series, they generally sort of purge the traditional top layer listings for products on their website when the new refresh model comes along. I assume that the previous or the pre-refresh cameras are no longer going to require licensing there. Hopefully that is the case, and we'll find out hopefully soon enough. But I'm not really in love with this idea that Synology are kind of looking at their new cameras and going, well, this license thing hasn't really worked out. Let's roll back time. Now, to Synology's credit, I found out about this about an hour ago, and when I did, I reached out to a senior representative from Synology, and they responded really, really fast. That also indicates that, one, they've clearly known this was going to be the reaction and therefore needed to get ducks in a row, and also that this has clearly been in the works for a while for it to be so clearly responded to so quickly. But again, to their credit, my questions about why this has been the case and how this will play out. So number one, the idea these cameras, the newer generation cameras, are going to arrive with a lower price point there. Obviously, that is now going to kind of spread across a little. Okay, so rather than include a license, you've reduced the price to include the camera license. So really, that's all much of a muchness. It's obviously lowered the barrier of entry, but if you're a Synology user anyway, who cares? It's back to that argument of, is there a free license or does this not require a license? That's just the same thing. But the other reason is they are going to allow their cameras to be used with third-party hardware there. Now, I imagine this is from on-site and installations on easier migration to allow their cameras to be pre-existing at this point and be migrated over when Synology surveillance systems are in place. But in the meantime, these cameras have to be used with a third party, and therefore they may need a surveillance license in place anyway, so they've dropped the price accordingly. But nonetheless, I'm pretty sure that you can still use Synology cameras in third-party hardware anyway. Surely there's a way they could wangle the warranty system at the very least, or come up with some, license rebate system. I know that sounds incredibly complicated, but PR and marketing wise, reversing camera licenses being included or unnecessary on their newer generation cameras feels icky. And I think they probably know that to a point. The thing is, unlike the discussion last year, where Synology had a terrible PR year in 2025 over that hard drive stuff, which they eventually U-turned, this change of policy with regards to licensing and their cameras on Synology NAS systems, it's not evil, it's not bad, it's just silly, and it seems like to the reduction in price that this is going to be effective of on cameras and the potential negative backlash that's going to be caused by this, by pretty much undermining one of the big selling points of their cameras to a lot of users, just doesn't seem worth it when you could have just changed some of the usage policies and the TNC and warranty policies on your cameras on third-party devices. They're seemingly pulling away one of the appeals of their cameras that drew people away from third-party hardware that was already cheaper. By removing that license and lowering the price barrier, everyone knows it's artificial. You've still got to buy the sodding license, which then means, why am I not looking at those cameras? And in an age, and I'm really sorry to bring them up again, but when you have a brand like Unify with their Protect, and arguably I still believe, by the way, that Surveillance Station as a surveillance platform is better than Protect, it's not better enough to justify having to buy a license for every one of my cameras compared with using Protect, their cameras or OnViv cameras, and still not needing a camera license for either. What Surveillance Station brings, and the margins between these two platforms, by the way, watch Tom Lawrence's video where he compared both of these platforms, has closed dramatically. And it's closed enough that this change of stance on these surveillance cameras, I think, will do drastically more harm than good. But let's talk about it in the comments. There'll be an article listed below as well, where we'll go into more detail. I'll have that turned around, hopefully, relatively quickly, because I can't wait to talk to you guys about this. This just feels silly. It's just a silly decision. But what do you guys think? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.